Is the Yortzeit of a Chaim Brisker, a Chaim Soloveitchik. He was the son of the Beis Halevi, and I think he's credited with the Brisker way of learning. But people don't know about him is that he was a Hasidish. There's a famous story about him that a Hasidish Yid came to him for a skam on the Sefer. And Reb Chaim said, okay, let me see, did you get any other askamas? Show me what you got. So he looks at some askamas from other Gedolim. Reb Chaim tells this guy, looking at these askamas, they're not very enthusiastic. They're like very parav askamas. So the Yid says, true, but you have to understand, I'm Chassidish. These are Litvish Rabbanim. They automatically discount their enthusiasm because I'm a Chassidish. So Reb Chaim starts to laugh and says, and what do you think I am? So the Yid said, what do you mean? You're a Chassidish. So Reb Chaim said, you know the story? So he said, I sure do. So Reb Chaim said, tell us over the story. And this is the story. When Reb Chaim was a little baby, his father, the Beis Halevi, lived by the Shver, by the grandfather. The grandfather was a Hasidic Yid. He probably had money, right? And staying in the house with his family, they were hosting a Rebbe, the Rebbe of the Beis Halevi's father. His Rebbe was staying by him. And Reb Chaim, who was an infant at the time, was very sick, and he was dying. And the doctors had no solution for him, and they had given up on him. Reb Chaim wouldn't ask the Rebbe for a bracha. I'm sorry, the Beis Halevi didn't ask the Rebbe for a bracha. But his father-in-law told the Rebbe, my grandson is dying. Please give him a bracha. Save him. So the Rebbe said, without a doubt, he's going to get better right away. How do I know? The way I know is because Avraham Avinu is the one who infused DNA into every Yid. The DNA of Chesed, of doing Chesed, every Yid, Avraham was known for his Chesed. And of the fact that all Yidden are Goyim Chasodim, that's one of the trademarks of a Jew. By Shonim, what are they? There's by Shonim, and there's Goyim Chasodim. I forgot what the third one. Anybody remember what the third one is? There's three trademarks of a Jew. So Goyim Chasodim was one of them, and that's because it was imprinted into our DNA by Avraham Avinu. So anytime a Chesed occurs, there's a part of Avraham Avinu there. And it's brought down in the Gemara that Avraham Avinu wore a jewel around his neck, that if you looked at it, you automatically got healed. So clearly, Avraham Avinu is here in this household because of the chesed that you do. You're hosting me. So I'm sure he has that jewel there. You might not realize that you're looking at it, that you're seeing it, but it's here. And sure enough, Reb Chaim got better. It was a meifus of this Rebbe. So this fellow is saying, so I know you're Chassidish because you're only alive today because of a bracha from a Rebbe, so you'll give me a good haskama. So Reb Chaim said, I want you to know, my father, the Beis Halevi, told over this story to me exactly how you are repeating it. So that was the story. Now, I don't know if he got his haskama at the end or not. That part of the story, I did not hear.
We don't know what
the time was yet. Today we still benefit from the Torah of Reb Chaim. Okay. There was they once asked Reb Chaim Brisker when he was a little boy, one of the places where we know you go Basra, the Gemara tells us, how do you know you go Basra? Because the law is, Maka over the Imay Moishus. When you're hitting a man, how do you know that this is your father? How could you be 100% sure that this is your father? The Torah says, there's a rule, Roiv Be'ila is Achar Baal. Roiv Be'is that a woman would be from her husband. So even if she was a promiscuous woman, we could still assume that Roiv Be'is is from her husband, and therefore the Roiv states that this is his child. That's how you can kill somebody if he's Makah Avimai. You could rely on the Roiv. So they asked Reb Chaim, why is the raya that the Gemara brought that you go Basar Roiv from Makah Avimai? we know the halach is if someone curses of a vimai, from a kal of a vimai, he also gets killed. So why didn't they bring a raya from a kal of a vimai? How do you know this is his father? It must be because Rav Biel is Achabah. They asked this to Reb Chaim when he was a little child. So without skipping a beat, Reb Chaim said, you don't have to know who your father is to curse him. You can say, whoever my father is, he should be cursed. So therefore, you don't need the right. But to hit, you have to hit the right person. And therefore, we only know right from there. So now the Gemara starts off with discussing what is meant in certain syntaxes, certain words written in a Shtar Mechira, what is meant by it, and therefore, when it's describing the property, what is included and what is not included. So Amoicher is Abayis. The response is Stam. In other words, he writes a bill of sale on this home. But there are certain parts of the building that are connected to it. And the question is, are those included in the sale of a house? So Zok to Mishnah, Loi Macher es a Yitzia. The Yitzia is not sold. The Rashbam says, the Gemara will tell us what a Yitzia is. But basically, it's like an add-on, smaller room that's an add-on to the house. Is that included in the sale? Zok to Mishnah, it's not. And the Rashbam says, it's not considered part of the house. Even though you can directly enter the Yitzia through the house. You don't have to go through a separate entrance to get to it. There would be an argument, since it's made to service the house, it's an extra room for the house. When you sold it, you included that as part of it. Nevertheless, that is not included in the sale. This is a room that the Rashbam explains. So it's in the house. And it's open to the house, which I would assume means that the only way you can get in and out of that room is through the house. The Yitzia, you can get her through the house, but you might be able to get her through the outside as well. The cheder is literally a room in the house, but I guess it's a room that's separate from the house. Since you don't use this room like you use the house, because it's not made to live in, rather it's only like a storage area. It's like a dresser. It was like a storage room, like a cold storage. Therefore, even though the bill of sale says I bought your house, it does not include a storage room in the house. And it doesn't include the roof. That's if the roof is an independent area that you could live in. Because if it didn't have a mica, then it's bottled to the house because clearly it's not a place that's going to be used. If it has a tzuras pesach, even though it's not 10 tvachim, so if the roof is a tzuras pesach, we'll see in the Gemara exactly what this means.
No, there's no access. It's sold even without access.
Again, if it's something that
It's
can be used independent of the house, that's right. So but at the end of the day, it's dependent upon if it can be used independent of the house, and depending on its characteristics, we will consider it independent use or not. So a tzuras pesach might say, okay, there's a proper access to it, so clearly it's intended to be used. If it has an independent use, then maybe it wouldn't be included in the sale. Dr. Gemara, ma yitzia. What exactly is a yitzia? Hacha targimu after. Here it was described as an after, which Rashi tells us is a pantomime. Binyan namach etzel abayis mitzidoi oimoyacherim. So the way I would look at it, it would almost be like a small add-on to the house, either at the back or at the side. But the Lezi Rashi, see what he says. A pantomime. Okay, he doesn't give us a Yiddish word to describe it. Sometimes he does. Okay, it's a botka chalila. What's a botka chalila? Iunami kimin afsa samach labais. It's also like an added-on room to the house, but it's not a regular room that you would use and sleep in. It was a patio type of thing. It was an enclosed patio. It's windows from ceiling to floor. Ludgers blaz. Ani loshen chalila. Chalila is a loshen of hollow. Shim shekois lo yicholu kol sevivov. Its walls are hollow around it. Vasu chaloinois, and it's made like windows. I guess hollow walls means it's not bricked in. It's just a frame, and it's primarily glass. Let's see what he says for Ludrish. Fish achsadra, like a patio. Asuya chaloinois nikolatstan. So either way, it's an add-on, but if we had to make the assessment on our own, an added room, an after, would logically be more likely to be included in the sale of the house than the achsadra. Because an added room is just another room to a house which you use the same way you use the house. An achsadra is a completely different type of area. So the logic would dictate that it's more likely that you would include this add-on room in the sale of a house than you would an achsadra. And that's what the Gemara says. If you hold that even an add-on room, an added bedroom, is not included in the sale of the house, surely the patio, which you use in a completely different way than you use the house, surely that wouldn't be included in the sale. But Laman Damar, Botka Khalila, only a patio is not included, but an extra room, which is basically you're selling a larger house almost. Mizdavno, that would be included. Okay, beautiful. So that's that.
uses the word veranda.
Veranda.
I think it's only the American people. Yeah.
I've heard. I mean, growing up, I heard that word being used. Where do they live? They probably have no verandas.
That's why.
They probably don't have verandas around here.
If you're living in Brooklyn, you don't know what grass is. So.
If you go to upstate New York, everybody knows what a veranda is. In Brooklyn, yeah. In Borough Park, no one knows what a veranda is. Okay. Dr. Gemara. Ta'ani Rabbi Yosy. Shalosh Shemosh Yeshloi. There's three words that were used to describe a small little room. Now, the Gemara's mind uses Dvarim Shebekdusha to describe anything that they're discussing b'divrei choil. And when we think of a little room, the Gemara thinks of a little room right away. The Gemara's mind goes straight to the Beis Hamikdash. So there were three names for the little rooms that were in the Beis Hamikdash. What are these little rooms that we're talking about? Along the three perimeter walls of the Beis Hamikdash, meaning the northern wall, the southern wall, and the western wall, there were rooms, there were storage rooms all the way around. There was actually 3 stories of these little rooms. So, Dr. Gemara, these little rooms we find in the Navi were referred to with 3 different names: Yitzia, Sela, and Atah. Yitzia. Where do you find the word Yitzia used? The Chsev, it says in the Lachim, HaYitzia HaTachtoina Kamesh Ba'ama Rachba. Now, this pasuk describes the construction of the Beis Hamikdash, and the way it would work was as follows: the outside walls of these rooms, was 3 stories, were flat. Now, if you have a straight up wall and you want to create levels, you'll be forced to drill into the walls to install beams to make the main floor you're on the ground. But the second floor, you have to put beams across. Now, how are you going to put beams? You need to drill into the walls to put joist anchors, and then you could put your beams there. They didn't want to do that. So what they did is the walls of the building on the second floor were thinner. So let's say the wall would be an amma thick on the lower room. On the upper room, the second level, the wall was a half amma thick, but it didn't move in on the outside. The outside was still flat on the inside, which means the room on the second level was a little bit bigger than the room on the lower level. And it was that ledge that they put the floor beams of the upper level. So the Rashbam explains it so beautifully. Gimel hayu zu al gavzu. It was actually 3 stories of rooms. Each floor, the room on each floor, although they were stacked, the room on each floor was 1 amma larger than the floor below. Why? They would make the wall thinner. So the room got bigger. To put the floor beams, the floor joists on that ledge without having to drill into the walls. To get smaller, they decided to graduate the wall narrower and narrower so they wouldn't have to drill into the walls to hang the joists. They can rest them on that ledge. So that's how it was done. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. So that's how, where you see the word Yitzia being used. Tzela, you also find the word Tzela to describe these little rooms. Tzela el Tzela, Shalosh Shloishim Pahim. Okay, and then Ta, you also find that, let's see the whole pasuk inside. We have the pasuk right here. But Tzela is Tzela el Tzela, Shalosh Shloishim Pahim, Uvois Bekir. They were in the wall. Asher Labayis, Tzlois, Soviv. They were around 3 sides of the Beis Hamikdash. Again, we didn't want to drill into the walls, so the walls were made thinner as they moved up, so that the beams could just rest on that ledge. Ta, where do you find the word ta? Kana echad oirech. Kana is an amma. It was an amma long, kana echad rachav, and an amma wide. And between these little cubicles, chamish amis was 5 amis. Let's have a look at the pasuk inside. Let's look at the Rashbam that describes the pasuk. Kana echad oirech. Hainu sheish amis. I apologize. A kana is 6 amis. A room that's only 1 amma isn't very spacious. So the room was actually 6 amis. You can meet us a kana kidem afarish biches. In Yecheskel, the Navi tells us that the Akana is actually 6 amos. It was talking about the bottom one that was 6 amos, and it got bigger as the rooms got bigger as you moved up because the walls got narrow. Okay, so these are the 3 words to describe this little room. Or Iba Yisema Mehacha. This is actually a pasuk that's describing the cross section of the Beis Hamikdash. So if you're going from east to west, the wall in between the back of the Kodesh HaKodeshim and the Ta, which was behind the Kodesh HaKodeshim, that wall was 6 amos thick. That's a very thick wall. Hata Chamesh, the room itself was 5 amos. And then, the wall between the back of the Kodesh HaKodeshim and this cubicle was 6 amos. The Ta itself was 6 amos, like we said earlier, it's a color. And then the outer wall, the outer western wall of the Beis Hamikdash building was such a thin, flimsy wall, it was only 5 amos thick. Right? So it's describing the cross section because the whole length of that building was 100 amos. So as the Mishnah lists off in Midos the entire length, when it gets to this cross section, these are the numbers. Amar Zutra. This that we said, as the Rashbam says, this that we said, that we say that this little room is not considered part of the home when it's being sold. That's only if it's a significant size, 4 amos by 4 amos, which gives it its own independence. If it's a tiny little room, it's for sure not a separate entity, and it's for sure it's like a closet. It would be, of course, included in the sale. So Amar Zutra, then it's choshev b'fnei atzma. But something so small and insignificant wouldn't be separated out of the contract. That would be part of the sale of the house. According to you, that says anything that's smaller than 4 amos is automatically included in the sale of a property. I'm going to illustrate to you something that's smaller than 4 amos, and it does maintain its own significance, its own independence, and it's not included in the sale of a property. If somebody has a pit in his property, it's not to be learned. If you sell somebody a chutzner, it does not include a bar that you might have dug in that property for water. It does not include a bar or a dus. A bar is an excavated hole in the ground. A dus is also a bar, but if you built it up on top of the ground with walls, that's called a dus. If you go to Chaim Tzi's well, it's like an old-fashioned well that he has in Bannockburn. It goes down very deep. It's a bar, but there's still a brick wall around it about 3 or 4 feet high, like most wells. That brick above the surface of the earth, that's the dus part. Because the first time someone made one, his friend asked him, "What's a dus?" So that's why I assume that's why it was called a dus. Okay. Or a thingy. Chaim Tzvi has a well in his front yard. We go tashlich there.
Really?
Yeah.
There's water.
There's water in the well. That's right. Okay. You could make wishes there too. It's not.
They're pointing.
It's not. Lo yasabor, lo yasadus. Apapi shekosov loy umka varuma. Even though I wrote in my contract of sale, I'm not just selling you the surface of the earth. I'm selling you the air rights up to Shemayim and the ground rights down below. Because the law is, I'm not allowed, if I sell you a property and I own part of it as well, I can't dig under your property because I sell you umka. I sell you the whole property down to the core of the earth. Yet, I still have not included a bore in the property. So don't you see clearly, are you going to say Hakanami? Rav Nachman, are you going to make that same statement? You have an arba amis in Eloi. Only a bar that's 4 amos by 4 amos. Does the Mishnah say is not included in the sale? But if it's less than 4 amos, it's included in the sale, and that's not logical. The Rashbam says because boyers are never 4 amos by 4 amos. Boyers are always smaller, as the Rashbam says. It's air rights and it's ground rights. All I mean to include when I say air rights and ground rights is I'm including any second floor or underneath it. The lekech can stop a moicher from digging a tunnel underneath the house. So hakadami gabe bar v'dos. You have a dollar amos eidim mocher v'loi, and if it's not 4 amos, lechoshev b'fnei atzmon umizdaven b'hadei bayis bitmiyah, it's automatically included in the sale of a home. V'haloi stam bar loy hava arba amos roichev. The bar kotzu, a bar is a much smaller thing. So how could you make such an argument that's really going to discount the whole Mishnah of lo yasabar, because it's only a big bar, which kamat you don't find. Zok to Gemara, hachiyash. There's a very big difference between the bar and the add-on room. The use of a bar is very, very different than the use of a property. So therefore, it's logical to say that I'm not including a bar, even though it's a small bar. But a hacha, when you're just talking about an extra room to a house, the room of the house is used just like the rest of the house is used. And therefore, it's logical to say that it was included in the sale. Therefore, if it's a complete room for amis, a dober choshev on its own, then maybe we can argue that it's not included in the sale of the property. But v'loy, if it's a tiny little room like a closet, loy choshev, it'll just be bottled to the use of the rest of the property. Dr. Ashba, bar v'dus tashmish luchud, shamukamim, they're deep with tashmish l'mayim, and they're used primarily to store water. Ubayis tashmish luchud, but your house is used to store water; it's used to live in it. So therefore, by their very nature, they're distinct from one another. Therefore, they wouldn't be included in the sale of a house. Even though the bar is not dalaramas. Although Yitziu bias, Chadu Tashmishava, it's an extra room. Humakam Dira. So therefore, it's only considered distinct that maybe not included in the sale if it was at least 4 amas by 4 amas. Beautiful. Zok the Gemara, v'loyes acheder shelafnim hemedu. And it doesn't include the room in the back. So it didn't include the Yitzia, and it didn't include the room in the back. So for the Gemara, what logically would seem to be included in the sale more? Zok the Gemara, hashto Yitzia loy mizdam. The Yitzia is much more similar to the use of a cheder in the back. Because the Rishbam said a cheder in the back was not made to live in. It was a storage room. It was like a walk-in storage room. So it has a different type of use. So Frank the Gemara, if the Mishnah already told us that even an extra bedroom is not included in the sale, surely a storage room, which is a different type of attachment than your home that you're selling, surely that shouldn't be included. Surely a storage room that's not used in the same fashion as your house, surely that should not be included. Why does the Mishnah need to itemize that separate? Zok the Gemara, turning on to Daf Samach Aleph from the base. Loy tzricha. You really didn't need to say it. Where is it nageya in a specific case? If I'm going to give you the coordinates of the border of the house that I'm selling you, when I gave you the border, I gave you a perimeter that included that extra room. So you might think, I gave you a perimeter that included the extra room. Obviously, that's what I'm including in the sale, because it's anything within that perimeter that I described in the contract. Kamash Malam, that giving an outer perimeter does not necessarily mean that I'm including everything in the sale. It's just an easy reference point to describe the property. That's why I gave you the outer perimeter, but not to include everything that's in that perimeter. And Rav Nachman taught us this halacha, but let's just peek into the Rashbam before we see Rav Nachman. The truth is, normally you wouldn't have to say because it's a different use. And we already know even the Yitzhi is not included. Ella, you know why Armish is talking about? Kigoyin, the motzar loy, moicher lekeach, bishtar mechira, mitzarim chisoinim shechutz l'cheder. The perimeter described in the sale included in its perimeter that extra room. So now, the Sokadai Chamina, mocher secheder, shari besoich hamitzarmu. You'd be able to make a very strong argument that if I described the perimeter of what I'm selling you, and that room is within that perimeter, surely that should be included in the sale. The big chiddush that our Mishnah says, if that's what he wanted to sell, why did he include in the description of the property the perimeter of an area that he's not selling? Because of Beis Hashal Ploini, it's Mitzorim Hirchavu. He actually described the property with bigger perimeter than it actually is, but there's a good reason for him to do that. Because Rav Nachman taught us halacha, we'll see his halacha in a moment, but if you have a house and you're including part of the house and part of that you're not including, it's a little bit difficult to provide the exact perimeter because it's part of the house. How are you going to separate it? So just for the ease of description, he said, I'm selling you this house. But he doesn't really mean the whole house. He just means the living part of the house. And it's the norm. It's the norm when people sell things to give a set of perimeters that to describe the perimeter in an easy to describe way, even though it's not completely accurate. And even though not everything is included. The ein zeh meitzer hanikr la'anshe yair. If you're going to start providing perimeters that are so specific, it will be too hard for people to understand. He wanted to use a perimeter that would be easy to identify. So you might ask, well, what if I actually did mean to sell that extra room? How would I write that contract up? So the Gemara is going to tell us, in response to Reb Nachman, they had to create a special nusach in a shtar mechira if I actually did want to include those. Because now that we've just discounted the value of any perimeter described, because you can always say I didn't mean it. So what if I do mean it? So there's going to be a special nusach that would have to be added into the star if I really mean it.
So
It's like the Israeli politicians. Yes, I promised to do this, but I didn't promise to keep my promises.
So according to Rav Nachman, we go with like the surveyor plans as opposed to the floor plan, because the floor plan would be.
I guess so. I guess so. Yeah. So let's see what Rav Nachman said. What happens if you want to sell your apartment that's in a condo building, right? So often when you look at people's listings posted in Shul, even when there's a condo for sale, sometimes it's pictures of the interior of the condo, but sometimes they just put a picture of the building up, right? You're not selling the whole building, you're only selling one apartment. That's mamish an example of what this is. The easiest way to describe it is to put a picture of the building, but of course you're not selling the whole building. If you're selling a house that's in a large building, so there would be a very big common area surrounded by individual units. Even though you said it's this condo building, you don't mean to sell the whole building. This has to be speaking about a guy who owned the whole building, because if he didn't own the whole building, he couldn't be selling the whole building anyway, right? So even though he said this building, it's mitzarim hirchim, he just wanted to use easy language to describe it. Let's see the Rashbam again. Rab Nachman, no, we did it already. Bira Gedoyla, Bayis Gadolu, it's a large building. Upsuchen loy bottom sevivoiso. There's individual units that open up to it. Ve'nabira asuya latashim. El lishiva ve'hilich bnei abat. The common area wasn't used to live in. It was used as a common area. The rest of it. V'akol bayis echaru. It's all one big building. K'dichsiv habira asher hachinois. So you find that term. So the halacha is, he was in one of the units. So let's see what it says. Hey Chidami, what exactly are the specifics? It's always, the devil is always in the details. If everybody, when they wanted to describe the individual apartment, they used the word bias, and if they wanted to describe the entire complex, they used the word bira, bira, shita, that's pashit. Bias ovenly, bira lois ovenly. If I tell you I'm selling you a bias, and bias is the word that's used to describe an apartment, even though I tell you the address of the whole building, it's obvious I'm only selling you an apartment because I said bias. Ella, you're forced to say the lebira nami kari lebias. People use the word bias to describe the whole building. Well, if that's the case, then kula is ovenly. In fact, he did sell the whole building. Loy tricha, it must be the ruba karile bias, bias, and lebira bira. Most people use the word bias to describe an individual unit, and use the word bira to describe the whole complex. However, there's a minority of people, the economy, the lebira karile bias. So my dutema, you might say kula is ovenly. He sold him everything, because some people refer to the whole bira as a bias. Kamash malam, and here is the punchline. If you did really mean to include the whole bira, you would have had to add an extra clause into the star. And what you would have had to say was, I'm not retaining for myself anything within the perimeters of what I've just described. So you have to add that. If you don't add that, then we don't take the perimeter, the idea of the property, completely accurate. And you might not be buying all of the items in that perimeter as described, unless you added a clause to say anything that's in this perimeter, I'm not retaining for myself at all. But in this star, it didn't have that. Shemamina, that tells us Shiyure Shire. In fact, he's not giving everything, he's only giving the bias. And that is the chiddush of our Mishnah, that even when the star seems to include a larger building, nevertheless, it doesn't, unless it's specified in the star. Let's see the Rashbam. Mao de Tema, Kivin the Mechalai Mitri Buroi, since he did outline the outer perimeter, Bukhule Mikri bias, and there are people who refer to the whole complex as a bias, maybe Kula Zavanlay, Kamash Long Rab Nachman, the Lamrina, in the Havilay Lamiftav, Lemoither, the Moither should have written in the star, Ulay Shires Bizvini Alin, Shibisoich Arba Mitzarim, Kadamai Klum. I have not retained for myself anything that's included in the perimeter that I described. This is what the Chachamim were mesaked that you have to write specifically if you do mean to include everything. Many people will give a larger perimeter when they're describing the property that they're selling. And their intent was never to sell everything that's in these borders. And if you so therefore they were misakin that if you really mean to include everything, your star has to specifically say, I'm including it. Now the obvious question to this whole sugya is the price for an apartment is not going to be anywhere near the price of the entire building. So the obvious question is, why don't you look at how much I'm paying, and the purchase price should dictate what I was actually buying. So the Rashbam asks this kasha, and the answer is very, very simply. I just need to find where he says it inside, and that is since ein no. Oh, here it is. It's a little bit later. You can't use the argument based on the purchase price. That would dictate what he's buying. There's no fixed price on karka. The wildest price is an acceptable price, legabe karka, because one guy might be buying a house to live in, the other guy might be buying the house to put up a condo building, which would value the property at a much higher rate, and therefore the price offered is not necessarily indicative of what is being bought. The Omer of Nachman, Omer Rabbi Baravu. Rav Nachman, Omer Rabbi Baravu did not only say this halacha regarding the purchase of a house, he also said it regarding the purchase of a field. Let's say you own all of the properties in a huge valley. So all of the properties are yours, but of course, around your big block of properties, other people own properties. And I want to sell one of my many properties that's in this big area. What I did was, as I said, on the north is Reuben's fields, on the south is Chaim's fields, on the east is Beryl's fields, and on the west is Shmerel's fields. So basically, I gave you the borders of my entire land, way larger than the actual property within my land that I was intending to sell. So the halach is it's only mitzar merchavla. We say I gave you a bigger perimeter again because how am I going to describe one piece of property within my properties? It's very hard. Using the border between me and another person, that's easier. But I don't really mean to give you everything within that perimeter. Mitzar merchavla. Hechidam. The same question. Either korele l'sada sada ulabika bika. If when you say the word sada, you mean sada, and when you say bika, you mean bika. Pshita sada zavanle. Bika lay zavanle. The bill of sale says, I'm selling you a field, not an entire bika. Ve'ela, in order that it should be a chiddush, you have to say the labika nami korele sada. That means that when it's said in the shtar mechira, I'm selling you a sada, it could mean the entire bika. Well, then kula zavanle, because the perimeter details what it is. Latricha. There are people to sada korele sada ulabika bika, but the economy ulabika korele sada. There are also places where most people call a bika and the sada, but some people use the word interchangeably and will describe the whole bika as a sada as well. In those cases, I'm not retaining for myself in the sale anything and didn't write it. Beautiful. So we have the same halacha that Rav Nachman states by a house and by a field, the same concept that there's this idea that people will make a bigger perimeter when they're describing a property so that it should be easier to show where this property is. But this halacha of Rav Nachman only applies in a very limited case. It only applies in a place where people refer to a bika as a bika and the sada is a sada, or a bias has a bias, and the yitzia has a yitzia, but and cheder is a cheder. But some people use them interchangeably. It's only there where this whole discussion is relevant.
And you give the description of the gift, you have to say what part of the gift.
Well, you'll have to eventually show them which one it is, but in the Shtar Mechira, it doesn't have to have it. No, he just wrote the whole bit. Why? Because it would be very difficult for them to explain. And people didn't have GPSs, so you can't give them coordinates. What if it's in the middle? So it would be a little bit hard.
You're not selling the whole.
Well, that's the shayla. Maybe you are. That's the whole discussion. Maybe you are. So Zokter Mor Tricha, why did Reb Nachman need to repeat his halacha when it comes to a house and a cheder, and when it comes to a soda and a bikkel? It's really the same halacha that people will give a larger perimeters to make it easier. Zokter Mor, no, each one has its own individual chiddush. The Yashmi and bias. If Reb Nachman only told us this chiddush by bias, mishum dehat hashmisha lechod, dehat hashmisha lechod. The fact is, the room in the house, we already said, is used differently, right? The back room was a storage room versus the house that's used to live in. So maybe over there, it's not included. The bika is all fields. It's a question, this field or that field, but all the fields are exactly the same use. Maybe you would say that there's no concept of hirchav gulim, and automatically everything that's written in the shtar is in the sale. So that's why Reb Nachman had to tell you that even by a soda, it's not in the sale. V'yashmi bika, and even if Reb Nachman only told us by the bika that the whole bika is not included in the sale, that's mishum de lahavalei lemimtzerlei. What is he supposed to do? How in the world is he supposed to identify one small grid in this huge area? It's very hard. Using the neighboring properties as the border is something that he can describe. Avobayis, but a house, he could have very easily described accurately the perimeter that he was selling. He could have described it more accurately, and he didn't. So maybe it's a raya kula zovanli. He really meant to include everything. Shricha, so Rab Nachman needed to tell us his chiddush by houses. Zog the Gemara, Kaman Azla Hod the Amar Rab Mori, the Vash Shmuel, Mishmei Dabai. The halacha that we're about to quote from Rab Mori, who is he going? And this is the halacha that he said. Haiman de bezavni leimidi lechavri. If someone sells something to his friend, if he wants to include everything in the sale, it has to specify. I'm not retaining for myself in this sale, plum, anything at all. And only then is everything included. This is exactly what Reb Nachman Amar Rabbi Barvu said, that normally a person will give a larger perimeter than what he actually intends to include in the sale. But if he specifies, I'm giving you everything, then of course you're giving him everything. Someone told his friend, I bought land from Reb Chia, and he bought multiple properties from Reb Chia. But he said, I am selling you the land that I bought from Reb Chia, which would indicate I'm not selling you all of the properties that I bought. I'm only selling you one of the properties that I bought. But he had two properties that were referred to as the properties that he bought from Reb Chia. I didn't say I'm selling you Reb Chia's lands. I said I'm selling you Reb Chia's land. So you only get one. Which one? So first problem, the less expensive one. Because since the star doesn't say, basically, the star only proves you get one land. The star doesn't prove that you have the better land. So the star will only get you the weaker of the two properties, the less expensive of the two properties. Amar Lei, what about the Amar Lei Arata? What if he said lands in plural? So now he's including more than one. So I'm looking at the Bach, the Amar Lei Arata. Then we say miot Arata shtayim. Minimum lands, if you use a plural tense, it has to include at least two. Then you'll have to give him two. The Amar Lei Kol Arata. What if you said all of the lands? So that means it's a more of an inclusive language. then it means kol arata the islay. Then it includes, if there was 10 properties, it would include all 10 properties. But lavar mebustani paradisa, it's only including regular fields because that's what arata describes. But if you have special orchards and beautiful gardens, those would not be included in the sale because those are normally not referred to as arata. The amalei zihara is a word that Rashbam says all the way at the bottom. Kolak akoyis kruinking, all type of lands, whether it's a bustani, a paradise, a field, all types of lands are referred to with zira. So then afilu bustani paradisa, then that's also included. But what part of what he purchased from a b'chia would not have been included? Lavar mibate v'avte, houses and servants, because those are not described by the word ziyara. But turning on to Amud Aleph, the amalei nichsei, all of the possessions that I purchased from a b'chia, I'm including in the sale. So then afilu bati v'avte, then you're even including that. What are you not including? Standard metalchlin would not be included. So if he said nichasai, it includes even bottom and avodim. Kol nichasai will also include the talchlin. Okay, we will stop here and we will, as Hashem, continue tomorrow bright and early. Everyone should have an awesome Sunday.